to another episode of the Way Lessons. And yesterday we left off on the Messiah Project's Jesus, Son of Mary. We will continue this lesson today. There's a lot of it. So as always, I repeat, as I've always repeated, so that nobody charges me unjustly, I am not the author of these lessons. I'm just reading it for you, or to you. If you want to find them, go to the Wayback Machine and look for the Daughters of Ma. Daughters of the Doma, Daughters of Ma, and The Way, it's called. So without further more interruptions, I start exactly where I left off. We need to leave Jacob now and pick up the story with one of his sons, his favorite son, Joseph. Genesis 37, verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Joseph was the son of Jacob and Rachel. The many-colored coat he was given is a clue to his nature. Multicolored robes were the vestments worn by the male priests of the goddess Nanshi, Babylonian name. These priests would be lowered into a pit in the earth. The pit represented a symbolic womb of the goddess. Once in this womb, the priests would divine and interpret dreams. Now that you know this, let's look at the story of Joseph. Joseph had offended his brothers by dreaming two dreams. In them, he was given power over them and ruled them. They became very angry and plotted against him, as this verse shows. Genesis, verse 23. And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. Verse 24. And they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Verse 25. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead, with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. Verse 26. And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Verse 27. Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Verse 28. Then there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. Joseph, as you can see, was a priest. He was placed in his diviner's pit by his brothers. Joseph gets taken to Egypt, and his skill as a diviner is quickly recognized. Joseph is not the poor defenseless little shepherd boy you have been taught to imagine. He was a powerful and accomplished priest. Later he will become the sacred diviner to Pharaoh himself. Note, some have speculated that the Pharaoh Djoser was in reality Joseph. The real importance of Joseph in Egypt, however, is the marriage which took place there. Here are the verses. Genesis 41, verse 41. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. Verse 42. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. Verse 43. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. Verse 44. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Verse 45. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath Paneah. Sorry for the mispronunciations. And he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. This is what we call a milestone in the history of the Hebrews. Past this point, my friends, there is no turning back. While Abraham is the father of the two sister peoples of Israel and Ishmael, Joseph is the gatherer of the scattered tribes in Egypt, where they will soon become one people, the Hebrews. It is Joseph's marriage that sets the stage for all that is to come. Why is this marriage so important? Let's find out together right now. Joseph is married to a priest's daughter. Her name is Asenath. Now ask yourself this. Would Pharaoh give Joseph just an old priest's daughter to wed? Or rather, would Pharaoh give Joseph just any old priest's daughter to wed? Try this one on for size. The woman Asenath was the high priestess of the temple of On. She was one of the most powerful women in Egypt. So, who is this On character they're making such a fuss over? On is the Hebrew word for one. There are a couple of gods and goddesses that have been called the One. The one we are concerned with, however, is by far the most significant. She was the Doma female in charge of the Hebrew sub-project. Her name is Isis, the One. Note, please don't confuse this with the God One we have discussed earlier. They are not the same. The goddess Isis, the Queen of Heaven, the star, Stella Maris, the One. She had many symbols associated with her worship. The star, the crescent moon, pay very much attention. especially those of you out there that hate the Muslims. You are treading dangerous waters. You are offending the very God you say you worship. This is what the enemy wants. This is what the elite bastards want. They want to see you all fight and kill each other while they stand back and watch. And when you're done killing each other, that's when they move in, and that's when they're going to take over, and that's what you know as the New World Order. And so far, you idiots are falling for it. You're falling right for it. You're going to deserve what you get. Leave those Muslims alone, is what I'm trying to tell you in other words. Let me read that again, because it's important. The goddess Isis, the queen of heaven, the star, Stella Maris, the one. She had many symbols associated with her worship. The star, the crescent moon, and in particular the fish of Isis, or in Hebrew, Nun. That's N-U-N. Her sacred nun. Now you understand why they call those women in the Catholic Church nuns. Oh boy. Her sacred number was 13. She and her twin sister Hathor were the two of the most powerful goddesses in ancient history. She was called the Eye of Ra. Oh boy. In her destroyer role. Now, here's a little something you probably don't realize. See, I'm revealing to you the symbols, okay, of these people in power. They're worshiping it the right way, but they're keeping you and me away from it. They want to guide us the wrong way. I don't got a problem with what they follow or worship. I got a problem with them keeping it a secret, number one, and number two, using and abusing us and having us as their slaves and cattle. That's my problem. That's my beef. So don't get it twisted. I hate lies, I hate liars, and I hate hypocrites. Now here's a little something you probably don't realize. Take out a US $1 bill, and I'm sure you've heard this one before. There's good old George Washington himself. Now turn it over and look on the back. You will see the Great Seal of the United States. Above the Egyptian pyramid is the Eye of Ra. This is the symbol for Isis/Hathor. When she's in her destroyer mode, she's Hathor. Just a coincidence? Look over the eagle's head. There are 13 stars, and the inscription E pluribus unum. It means out of many, one. Anuit Septis means the Divine One has smiled on our undertaking. All these Isis symbols on the American $1 bill, and what does it have to do with Joseph? Nothing. I just wanted to give you a glimpse of way down the road a ways, you might say. America will be the topic of a very important way message in the not too distant future. So these are all symbols of the goddess. The fish or nun, N-U-N, is particularly interesting. It ties in directly with Joseph, and as you will see later, with Jesus as well. Joseph was a priest of the goddess. These priests would carry a jar with a fish inside. The fish symbol was associated with both them and the goddess. A lot of you fools out there in Christianity, I'm sorry, but you got that symbol on your cars, don't you? You got bumper stickers of it. You got some of you are so foolish you put tattoos of it on you, and you don't even know where it comes from. You believe your priests, you believe your ministers, your pastors, and you have no idea what the fish symbol really means. They tell you something with Jesus, something about when Jesus gave people fish and bread. You've been lied to. You've been lied to. That's my problem, that they've been lying to you. All your religions have been lying to all of you. The fish symbol was associated with both of them and the goddess. Today we call that symbol Pisces. But back then, it was simply the fish of Isis. Store this fact deep in your mind for future retrieval. Now Joseph, who was already a priest of the goddess, marries a high priestess of Isis. He then begins to gather in the various scattered tribes. What was the reason for this gathering? The main purpose was to build a united people from the various peoples. But it was also to bring them under the control of the Doma's most powerful instrument on earth, the priestesses of Isis. But how did the Doma accomplish the task of bringing these people into Egypt? And let me stop right there and say something. At this point, you should find out, do some research on these priestesses of Isis. You really should. You should find out all about what they are, who they are, what they did, what their jobs were. You should find out. A lot of you are going to get offended. But that's what I'm here for. To tell you the truth and no bullshit. Genesis, verse 4, and the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the dearth was all, and the dearth, I'm saying it the way I see it, and the dearth was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. Verse 55, and when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, go unto Joseph, what he saith to you, do. Verse 56, and the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses, and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. Verse 57, and all countries came into Egypt to Joseph, for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all lands. I don't believe this needs any further explanation. Genesis 46 verse 1. And Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. Verse 2. And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. verse 3. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. And that's exactly what the Doma did. Before we leave Joseph, there is one more set of verses we should look at, and look at very carefully. Genesis 46, verse 31. And Joseph said unto his brethren, and unto his father's house, I will go up and shew Pharaoh, and say unto him, my brethren, and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are come unto me. Verse 32. And the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle, and they have brought their flocks, and their herds, and all that they have. Verse 33. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you, and shall say, what is your occupation? Verse 34. That ye shall say, thy servants' trade hath been about cattle from our youth even until now, both we and also our fathers, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. Now notice something very strange here. Joseph tells Pharaoh the men are shepherds, yet at the very end he instructs them to say they are cattle shepherds, specifically. And for those of you lost, so you don't get even more lost, when it talks about cattle, it's not talking about animals. Just a little hint, a little clue of what's being talked about here. He then says that the Egyptians hate shepherds. Why? They like cattle shepherds, but not the other shepherds. What other type of shepherds? What other type of shepherds? This line has nothing to do with Joseph or anything else holy. It was deliberately inserted by later church writers by order of their superiors. Why? What don't they want you to know? They want you to think that the Egyptians hated the other kind of shepherds, the shepherds of sheep. Now what, you may ask, could sheep ever do that would endanger your belief in God? Sheep are nothing docile little creatures. What the early church fathers are doing here, note, early church fathers includes both Hebrew and later Roman Catholic, is preventing an association that could, if revealed, damage your entire belief system. What? Over a bunch of sheep? No, my friends, over the people whose use of the sacrificial lamb was an integral part of their religion. The priestesses of Isis, who during the sacrifice ritual of killing a young male lamb and then spreading the lamb's blood over the altar and door lintel, would call upon Isis by her other name as the Great Shepherdess, the patron goddess of the shepherds, their star. Friends, the above information is not theological dynamite. It is a thermonuclear weapon. You are looking at a deliberate act of concealment. Remember the above information, as it will be just as they feared later on, totally devastating. Thus, the Hebrew nation was conceived, but it was not yet born, For that milestone in Hebrew history, we need to jump ahead to the house of a Hebrew slave and a very distraught Hebrew mother. Note, you may want to read chapter 1 of Exodus. All midwives were priestesses of the birth goddess Hathor/Hecat. Exodus 2 verse 1. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. Verse 2. And the woman conceived, and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a godly child, she hid him 3 months. Verse 3. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein. And she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. Verse 4. And his sister stood afar off, to wit what would be done to him. Verse 5. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. Verse 6. And when she had opened it, she saw the child. And behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Verse 7. So let me stop right there. Let me stop right there for a moment and add something, my own, analysis so far. This is, of course, talking about, what happened, with Moses, the origins of Moses. But ain't it funny that the Bible tells you that the daughter of Pharaoh knew the child was a Hebrew? Why is it none of these interpretations that you see, whether it's Charlton Heston as Moses, or the cartoon animated movie The Prince of Egypt, they never tell you this. And more importantly, how did the Pharaoh's daughter know what was different and distinct about the baby? It's really obvious if you think about it. How, if they all basically were the same as they want you to believe in these movies and these films and in these books written by the so-called scholars, that they were all basically, that they were all Semitic, is the lie. If they're all the same, how did she know that that baby wasn't an Egyptian? It couldn't be nationality-wise. It had to be racial. There was something different about that baby. Now, we can debate what race was what, who was what race. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying, obviously, there had to be a difference between an Egyptian baby and a Hebrew baby. And the Pharaoh's daughter knew it, understood it. What was different is the question. What was the race? You guys been lied to. You've been lied to. You've been lied to so much that now you have a group of people, you have a large group of people who are not even Middle Eastern, ruling the Holy Land, ruling what's known today as Israel, who also claim to be ruling the United States. That's what I said. They admit it. That's why they are involved in the entertainment industry and in the politics of this country. And they're not even real Hebrews. They admit it. They admit it. Well, somehow I know, and somehow she knew, the difference between a real Hebrew and a Middle Eastern Egyptian. I know the answer. I'm going to let you do the research and find out for yourselves. And get ready for a shocker when you find out. And she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Verse 7. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" Verse 8. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. And the maid went and called the child's mother. Verse 9. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, "Take this child away, and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it. Verse 10. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. And she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." Now, isn't that a beautiful story? There's only one small problem with it. It never happened. What? Are you crazy? I can hear you now. Come on. Come on. Didn't you ever watch the Ten Commandments? That's that stupid Charlton Heston movie. Yes, I have. And it's one of my favorite movies of all time. But like it or not, Moses and much of his story is made up. I know you are going to have a problem with this, so I'm going to take it real slow and from the beginning. The later church fathers, specifically the Hebrews this time, needed a history for their people. This is why in Genesis you find all those former stories and legends already written, but then taken by the Hebrews, modified, and made their own. Remember, since they are many people in one, it is in fact their history. So now you might expect me to say the story of Moses was borrowed from some earlier people's legend and incorporated into Hebrew history, right? Wrong. The story of the Exodus of the Hebrew peoples did in fact occur. It is the story of Moses that was made up. By now you must be thoroughly confused, which is, by the way, just what the church fathers wanted you to be. Should you ever try to figure this out, why, you should ask, would they need to make up an imaginary person like Moses if, as you even said, Exodus did take place? The answer is really very simple. The actual person that led the Hebrews out of Egypt was totally unacceptable from a theological standpoint to the early patriarchal Hebrew writers of the Bible. That's nice, you say, but once more in English, if you please, okay? The person who led the Hebrews out of Egypt, hold on to your seats. The person who led the Hebrews out of Egypt was a woman, not a man. Wow, that's the second time you've gone nuclear, and we're only in the second chapter. What? You want me to prove it? Okay, calm down. If it's facts you want, it's facts you'll get. But before I begin, take a moment to think of the irony in this whole affair. For the first time, the Hebrews have a bona fide piece of a major historical event, not somebody else's, but their very own. Yet, they can't even use it. If I may, though, let me get very serious for a moment. This is just one example of the suppression by early patriarchal writers of the major role women have had in mankind's evolvement. It is a brutal act of censorship with but one goal in mind: the demoting of all women to the status of second-class citizens, and not just in a male-to-female relationship, but more importantly, in relationship to God. It is inexcusable and heinous. This is the main purpose I have in writing the Way messages: to expose to all of you the terrible acts of oppression these men have forced on women in the name of their male God. It is my mission. It is my lady's wish. It is my jihad, if you will. This is coming from the author. And I have just declared it on all those who would oppress the daughters of the Most High, the daughters of earth, whose sisters are high, whose sisters on high are truly a force to be reckoned with. Now, here are the facts about Moses. Fact: the baby in the Reed story was borrowed from the birth story of Sargon of Akkad, circa 2242 through 2186 BC, whose mother, the temple maiden Initum, set him afloat in a basket made of bulrushes. Sargon was rescued by the queen's midwife, Aki. He was raised by the royal daughters and later became king of Akkad. Fact: the Egyptians never used Hebrew slaves to build their temples. No one but Egyptians were permitted to work the holy tasks, as any foreign involvement would have defiled the temple. Did you hear this? Are you listening? Let me repeat this. Fact: the Egyptians never used Hebrew slaves to build their temples. No one but Egyptians were permitted to work the holy tasks, as any foreign involvement would have defiled the temple. Fact: contemporary archaeologists can find campsites of ancient Bedouin nomads. Some were only 20 or so, camped for a couple of months. There is no evidence at all that anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000 people set up camp, especially for 40 years. Fact: there is no record of a male prince named Moses in the royal family of Egypt. There is mention of pharaohs with the word Moses attached to their names. Moses is not a Hebrew word. It is Egyptian. It has two meanings depending on the context it is being used in. The first is in a proper name such as Tutmos or Atmosis. It means unfathered son of a princess. In its second, more ethereal use, it can mean birth. Fact: there is no record in any other kingdom that mentions a 500,000 Hebrews walking by. Fact: there is a legitimate record of certain Hebrews being driven out of Egypt by the Egyptian army. This was a result of a leprosy outbreak in the outer slum areas of some cities. This is not, however, the Exodus. Those are the facts, my friends. Based on this, you might think that the Exodus never happened, and yet the Exodus of the Hebrew people did in fact take place, as I said earlier. Now please understand what I am trying to say here. I don't want any chance of being misunderstood. I am not trying to disprove the validity of the Exodus. On the contrary, I intend to prove its reality. Let me take a little water break, and I noticed that yesterday I said I was taking a beer break. No, it was water. The Jewish people take pride in their history and religious traditions. I will not in any way demean or try to disprove those traditions. I will, however, try to prove to those who may not believe in their reality that indeed they are based in fact and on actual historical events. The story of Moses is full of clues as to what really happened. In fact, if the character of Moses is removed, it makes perfect sense and fits with established history. One last point about Moses. The historian Tacitus wrote about the expulsion of certain foreigners from Egypt because of leprosy. They were gathered together, driven into the desert, and left there. Later they found water, took over some land, built a city/temple. They were led by a man named Moises. Again, although this story may have influenced the early writers, it is not the true Exodus or the birth of the Hebrew people. Their tale is much grander and more profound than any have ever realized. There is, however, one more problem with the story. Regarding the amount of people who supposedly left, I can say this without much fear of ridicule from archaeologists and historians. There is no record of up to 1/4 of Egypt's population leaving the country. If that large a number were to leave, it would have been major news all over the world, and more so in the region. It would have meant a fundamental shift in the internal structure of Egypt and a change in the region's power structure. You can bet Egypt's enemies would have recorded this level of loss to Egyptian forces and manpower. So what really happened? You have to remember here that the Hebrews really were in Egypt and what their status was. Early writers had to have an excuse why the people wanted to leave. They have blamed this on the terrible slave conditions which they were forced to endure. Therefore, they wrote that all Hebrews were enslaved, that there were Hebrew slaves may well be true, but to a much smaller degree. Remember that Joseph brought many people into Egypt. He bought up much of their land. But try to remember who Joseph married: the high priestess of On. His family would have continued in this position and status level. His daughters would have been made high priestesses of Isis, and their brothers priests also. The Hebrews, then, that we are concerned with, the actual participants in the Exodus, were not slaves, but rather nobility, whose status was just below that of Pharaoh himself. You Jews have also been lied to. My God, all of your religions have been lied to like a mother. Unbelievable. Now the question is, Christian Jews, who lied to you? Who's doing the lying? Your rabbis? Your priests? But they're just doing their job. Who above them is telling them, ordering them to lie? You better ask somebody. You better find out. Oh boy. Isis was one of the most powerful of Egyptian goddesses. She gave the pharaoh his divine right to rule. The symbol she wears on her head is called the Ma'mu'at, the foundation of the throne. The Egyptian pharaoh's power relied on very strict adherence to certain religious beliefs and tradition. Religion was part of the very fabric of Egyptian society. Earth civilizations today have no equivalent of this, thereby making it almost impossible to imagine. Their religion was Egypt. Pharaoh was the link between them and their gods. He was a man-made god given authority by the goddess Isis. The priests and priestesses of Isis were then vital to the maintenance of order. Now, do you remember who has control of this entire Isis order? Joseph and his descendants, the Hebrews. Now that you realize this, let's look at the story of Moses. Some of its parts have seemed totally inscrutable. Some of its parts that have seemed totally inscrutable should now become plain as day. First, I need to give you a brief synopsis of the true Exodus. According to established Egyptian history, you atheists, and you know who I'm talking to, you know who you are, you socialist pigs, who say it never happened, are dead wrong on this one. I wish they were dead wrong. Literally. The official Egyptian history records that Isis/Hathor had a very bad argument with her father, Ra, over her right to call some of the Egyptian and Hebrew people hers. Translation: there was a turf war between the priestesses of Isis and the priests of the other Egyptian gods. Isis then took all her priestesses and priests, their families, their servants, and slaves, and left Egypt for 40 years. Her main temple, or headquarters, was moved from Philae, or Philae, or Philly, to the city of Hazor. This is recorded history. It actually happened, and there is more than enough Bible correlation as you are about to see. If Moses was a male figure, invented to take over the historical role of a woman, who was the actual woman he replaced? The high priestess of Isis, direct descendant of Joseph, a Hebrew called Miriam. Miriam is the Hebrew name for Mara, or Isis, remember? The writer didn't take her out of the action, nor did they remove her brother Aaron. They simply invented a second brother, one of equal political and religious power. This would be necessary to accomplish the Exodus, and took all that Miriam had done and rewrote it so it was actually he that did them. Voila! Moses. Now, what did I ask you a video or two ago on a previous video? Why was it Miriam ordering around the people to put the blood's lamb on the lintel? You know what I'm talking about. You know what you've seen in the movies. Why was it Miriam? In the Bible, the movie show you something different. But in the Bible, it says Miriam ordered the people. Well, there you go. Because it was Miriam who was the real Moses. She was the real. Let me go back over here. Historical person. Oh boy. Let's look at what really happened. The first thing the writers needed to do was to find a way to include Aaron. He did take part in the Exodus, and since he was a man, it wasn't necessary to change his character. They were clever. Look at this verse again. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. Now this maid knew exactly who the mother was, and therefore this mother's other children could later be found and brought into the picture. Aaron in particular. In reality, this didn't happen. It was just to identify the parents of Aaron. The big mistake here is that the maiden knew already who the mother was. Why? The writers, even though they changed it, still felt guilty at having to change the story. So what they did was try to keep as much of the original characters as they could. With this in mind, let's identify this maiden and see how she knew who the mother was. Pharaoh's daughter had come down to the river, and the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. Normally, she bathed in the palace. On certain occasions, the priestesses of Isis, the maidens, would bless the river. Now, who do you think would have been there at this ceremony? That's right, the high priestess of Isis, Miriam. She knew who the mother was because it was her own. Important. This wasn't done to identify this woman with Moses, but to establish a plausible link to Aaron. Now let's look and see who really brought the people out of Egypt. First, we need to establish exactly which goddess we are dealing with. The following verse is a clue. Exodus 3 verse 14. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am has sent me unto you. Verse 15. And God said moreover unto Moses, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, The Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath sent me unto you. This is my name forever. And this is my memorial unto all generations. Verse 16. Go and gather the elders of Israel together, and say unto them, The Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, appeared unto me, saying, I have surely visited you, and seen that which is done to you in Egypt. Verse 17. And I have said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt, unto the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the, please excuse the pronunciation for this one, Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the I can't say this one, Jebusites, and onto a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm just trying to keep it real, y'all. I apologize if some of this pronunciation, I'm not a scholar of reading this old English, So, imagine if it was the real Greek, because Greek was the only known language that we got all of this. In case you didn't know, the interpretations of the Bibles that we got were from the Greek. All right? So, and if you know anything about the Greeks, interpretation, what I meant was translations. Pardon myself. I am has sent you. Who is I am? In the scrolls found at the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt in 1945, there is an entire chapter given by a goddess. This goddess uses the words I am when talking to the people. I recommend you acquire a copy and read this for yourselves. She identifies herself as I am and the goddess Thunder. She refers to herself as she whose image is great in Egypt. This of course, Isis. The name of the poem is Thunder, Perfect Mind. Read it if you really want to learn the truth. Note, it is vital that you remember her other name, Thunder. Later on, all these pieces are going to fall into place, and the larger picture they reveal will knock your socks off. So that identifies the goddess. The Nag Hammadi Library is a collection of 4th century papyrus manuscripts, also referred to as the Coptic Gnostic Gospels. Let me repeat that part. That's very important. The Nag Hammadi Library is a collection of 4th century papyrus manuscripts, also referred to as the Coptic Gnostic Gospels. They were discovered in Egypt in 1945. Well, that at least is the year they say. Who knows if they had discovered it early on and just told everybody in 1945? Because these secret society bastards, you can't believe anything they say. Now let's look a bit further down at this time, onto a land flowing with milk and honey. There were many foods associated with the goddess. The goddess. Some of the most important are milk, honey, apples, grapes, and figs. Milk and honey were mixed into a ritual drink of the goddess. Now notice the next set of verses. Exodus 3, verse 21. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And it shall come to pass that when ye go, ye shall not go empty. Verse 22. But every woman shall borrow of her neighbor, and of her that journeyeth in her house, jewels of silver, and jewels of gold, and raiment. And ye shall put them upon your sons, and upon your daughters, and ye shall spoil the Egyptians. Notice here who I am is referring to as leaving, and who brings the treasures of Egypt out with them. They are the women, or more accurately, the priestesses. It is not plain, is it not plain that it is the women spoken to? Now let's look at who God chose to tell his commandments to Pharaoh and Pharaoh's priests. Exodus 4, verse 10. And Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech, and of a slow tongue. Verse 11. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb, or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I, the Lord? Verse 12. Now therefore, go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. Verse 13. And he said, O my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him who thou wilt send. Verse 14. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is it not Aaron the Levite, thy brother? I know that he can speak well, and also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee. And when he sees thee, he will be glad in his heart. Verse 15. And thou shalt speak unto him, and put words in his mouth, and I will be with thy mouth, and with his mouth, and will teach you what ye shall do. Verse 16. And he shall be thy spokesman unto the people, and he shall be, even he shall be to thee instead of a mouth, and thou shalt be to him instead of God. In many faiths, it is not the high priestess who talks directly to the people, but a chosen priest. In this case, they need to supply a reason why the fictional Moses didn't talk. They simply said he talked like a retard. Now, I didn't. Remember, I'm just reading out of the book, y'all, so don't get offended by me. Now, don't laugh. Their intentions were good after all. Did you notice that Moses is no longer in Egypt? Yet, there went Aaron. Boy, old Aaron sure got around back then. What really happened here is that Miriam, as the high priestess, chose her brother, Aaron, as her spokesperson. Okay, let me see how much more we got. Let me see, it's 2:48. I can go a little further. This is important stuff. So let's try to round this up around 3. Well, it's time to really get down to it. We're going to look at the events which led up to and include the Exodus itself. But before we do, here is one more clue as to the identity of the deity we are discussing. Exodus 6, verse 1. Then the Lord said unto Moses, Now shalt thou see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand shall he let them go, and with a strong hand shall he drive them out of his land. Verse 2. And God spake unto Moses, and said unto him, I am the Lord. Verse 3. And I appeared unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, by the name of God Almighty, but by my name Jehovah was I not known to them. Who is Jehovah? Are you sitting down? Good. Now this is going to be a 50 megaton blast, so hold on tight. The name Jehovah is a code word used in the place of God's actual name. This code was used because, according to the revisionists, if anyone should say God's real name, the entire universe would end. So they said. So they invented a code word known as the Tetragrammaton. This code is composed of 4 letters, YHWH. It can be used in place of God's real name. You are allowed to pronounce it Jehovah or Yahweh, and a couple of lesser used variations. What is important here is that this code supposedly represents not the name actually, but rather what God is. So that you can understand, let's translate YHWH to Latin. Y translates to I. So the first letter is to announce that I am what follows. Now hold on to your hats. Let's translate the final 3 letters and end any doubt you may have had about the gender of the deity speaking in the above verse. HWH equals Eve, EVE, when translated to Latin. YHWH equals IEVE. What does Eve mean? It is the prime word for all females on this planet. It means woman. I, woman, equals I, Eve, equals Y, Yahweh. I did not make this up. It was put there in the Bible by the early writers to atone for changing so much else. They felt okay to change a woman to a man, but they drew the line at changing the identity and gender of their deity. If the truth ever became known, they would be able to fall back on this and say, see, we didn't change this, and it says, I, woman. Listen to me very carefully. The above is the essence of what I have been trying to tell you. I did not write those lines, nor give them their meaning. Remember, I said earlier that I wanted you to focus your anger on those who tried to change the gender of the deity in these verses. That person is not me, nor me. I'm just reading it. I have simply told you the truth as the above verse proves. If telling the truth has now become a crime or a sacrilege, and little by little it is in this country, then I willingly submit myself for punishment. And that's the author of this book writing, not me. That's what he's saying. So, know the truth, and it will set you free. Okay. Been on here for about an hour and 11 minutes. So let me stop it there for today. Whew. All this time you thought Jehovah, you say Jehovah, Yahweh, and you didn't even know what the meaning of it really was. My people suffer for lack of knowledge. Oh boy. Unbelievable. Unfucking believable. Well, till tomorrow, till next time. What's going on here? Where's my outro music? Oh! And this is just the beginning, y'all. Till next time. Peace.